No one showed up to the elderly woman's 80th birthday party. A few months later, all her children were stunned when they saw the will and didn't find what they were hoping for. The sun gently filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the living room of Elaine Montgomery. The elderly woman, with silver hair and tired but bright eyes, moved slowly around the room, fluffing the sofa cushions and ensuring each family photograph was perfectly aligned on the mantelpiece. Today was a special day. Elaine was turning 80, and her heart raced with anticipation at the thought of seeing her 4 children reunited once again under the roof that had watched them grow up. With trembling but determined hands, she placed 80 candles on the cake. She had baked the night before, a tradition she had maintained since her children were young. "My babies," she murmured, with a nostalgic smile. Her fingers tracing the photographs, there they all were. Robert, the eldest, with his investor's suit and confident smile. Lucy, the second, surrounded by flashes and admirers in her latest Instagram post. Alexander, the third, holding the latest technological gadget that had revolutionized the market. And finally, Martin, the youngest, with his serene smile and eyes filled with a wisdom that went beyond the material. Elaine sighed. It had been so long since she had seen them all together. Family reunions had become increasingly scarce as her children immersed themselves in their own lives, careers, and ambitions. But today would be different. Today, they would be the united family they once were. With renewed energy, Elaine headed to the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bread filled the air. On the table, 4 carefully wrapped gifts awaited their recipients. "For my grandchildren," she thought tenderly, imagining the smiles on the little ones' faces as they opened their presents. The hours passed slowly. Elaine alternated between glancing at the clock and peeking out the window, waiting to see one of her children's cars pull up in front of the house. The cake, with its 80 candles, waited patiently in the center of the dining room table. Noon came. The house remained silent. "Perhaps they are planning a surprise," Elaine told herself, trying to maintain optimism. She decided to call them just to make sure everything was all right. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. No one answered. Elaine left voicemails, her voice trembling slightly at the end of each one. "Robert, sweetheart, it's Mom. I hope you're on your way. I love you. Lucy, my girl, will you be here soon? The cake is waiting for you. Alexander, son, is everything okay? Call me when you can. Martin, my little one, I miss you. I hope to see you today." The hours continued to pass. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elaine remained seated in her favorite armchair, her gaze fixed on the door that refused to open. Finally, when the clock struck 8 in the evening, reality hit her with full force. They weren't coming. Her children, those 2 whom she had dedicated her entire life, had forgotten her 80th birthday. Tears, which she had been holding back all day, began to fall silently down her wrinkled cheeks. Elaine looked around at the perfectly arranged house, the untouched cake, the unopened gifts. All the love and dedication she had put into this day seemed to mock her at this moment. It was then that the phone rang. With her heart racing, Elaine rushed to answer. "Hello?" She responded, her voice filled with hope. "Aunt Elaine." The cheerful voice of her niece, Caroline, resonated on the other end of the line. "Happy birthday. Sorry for calling so late. I've been busy all day." Elaine felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Thank you, dear," she responded, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Caroline, always perceptive, noticed something was off. "Aunt, is everything okay? You sound a little sad." And it was at that moment, faced with the genuine concern of her niece, that Elaine felt something inside her break. The words came out in an uncontrollable torrent, telling Caroline about the painful absence of her children, about the loneliness she felt, about how it seemed the world had forgotten her. Caroline listened in silence, her heart breaking for her aunt's pain. When Elaine finally finished speaking, there was a moment of silence on the line. "Aunt," Caroline said finally, her voice filled with determination, "I think it's time your children received a lesson they will never forget." Elaine, surprised by her niece's tone, asked, "What do you mean, Caroline?" "Aunt, do you trust me?" Elaine hesitated for a moment, but then responded firmly, "Yes, dear, I trust you." "Good," said Caroline, "because I have a plan that will make your children realize what truly matters in life. But I need you to be brave, Aunt. Are you willing?" Elaine looked around at the empty house, the untouched cake, the photos of a family that seemed to exist only in her memories. She took a deep breath and responded, "Yes, Caroline, I'm willing. What do I have to do?" And so, on the night of her 80th birthday, Elaine Montgomery made a decision that would change the course of her life and that of her children forever. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a series of events that would test family ties, challenge the deepest convictions, and perhaps finally bring back the love and unity she so longed for. The morning following Elaine's birthday dawned grey and rainy. As if the sky shared the elderly woman's sadness, Elaine was in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea, when the doorbell rang. Upon opening the door, she was met with the determined face of her niece, Caroline. "Good morning, Aunt," Caroline greeted, entering the house with a suitcase in hand. "Are you ready to put our plan into action?" Elaine nodded slowly, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation reflected in her eyes. "Explain it to me again, dear. Are you sure this will work?" Caroline took her aunt's hands in hers. "Aunt, trust me, your children need a wake-up call to realize what they are missing, and you deserve for them to value your presence in their lives." Over the next few hours, aunt and niece worked on the details of the plan. Caroline, who worked as a lawyer, drafted a fake will with the conditions they had discussed the night before. Elaine, for her part, wrote 4 letters, one for each of her children, pouring into them all the love, disappointment and hope that she harbored in her heart. "Remember, Aunt," Caroline explained as they put the documents in an envelope. "Starting tomorrow, you will have officially passed away. I will take care of notifying your children and organizing the fake funeral. You will stay at the beach cabin until the right moment to reveal the truth." Elaine nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "And if it doesn't work, Caroline, what if my children simply don't care?" Caroline hugged her aunt tightly. "It will work, Aunt. I have faith that your children, deep down, still have their hearts in the right place. They just need to remember it." Meanwhile, in different parts of the city, Elaine's 4 children continued with their lives, unaware of the pain they had caused their mother and the plan that was about to shake their worlds. Robert, the eldest, was in his office in the financial district, eyes glued to the screens showing market fluctuations. His secretary entered, timidly. "Mr. Montgomery, your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner tonight with your in-laws." Robert grunted without taking his eyes. Off the screens, "Cancel it. The Asian market is volatile. I need to be here." Elsewhere in the city, Lucy, the second daughter, was in the middle of a photo shoot for her latest collaboration with a fashion brand. Her assistant approached with a phone in hand. "Lucy, your son wants to talk to you. He says it's important." Lucy rolled her eyes, not stopping her pose. "Tell him I'll call him later. I'm busy building our future." Alexander, the third, was in his high-tech office, surrounded by the latest gadgets and prototypes. His head of development entered with a worried expression. "Boss, there's a problem with the new software. The engineers say they will need to work all weekend to fix it." Alexander nodded distractedly. "Fine, tell them to do it. We'll pay overtime." Finally, Martin, the youngest, was in his modest apartment, meditating in silence. The sound of his phone pulled him out of his trance. It was a message from his ex-wife. "Martin, I know you said you needed time to find yourself, but the kids miss you. Could you at least call them?" Martin stared at the message for a long while before turning off the phone and returning to his meditation. The next morning, the 4 siblings received the same devastating call from Caroline. Their cousin's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry, it's about Aunt Elaine. She passed away last night in her sleep." The reactions varied, but the shock was universal. Robert dropped his coffee mug. Staining the important documents on his desk, Lucy collapsed in the middle of the film set, tears ruining her perfect makeup. Alexander froze, his brilliant mind unable to process the news. Martin, for his part, felt as if the ground opened up beneath his feet, an infinite void threatening to swallow him. In the days that followed, the four Montgomery siblings were forced to put aside their daily lives to deal with the loss of their mother. The funeral, meticulously organized by Caroline, was a somber event. The siblings, reunited for the first time in years, could barely look each other, absorbing every word written by his mother. When they finally looked up, Caroline began to read the will. The unusual conditions set by Elaine fell like a bomb in the room. Robert paled at the idea of living on minimum wage. Lucy seemed horrified by the prospect of a month without social media. Alexander couldn't conceive of a life without technology. Martin, for his part, remained silent, his expression unreadable. "This is crazy," Robert exclaimed, standing up. "How am I supposed to manage my investments from a supermarket checkout? A month without social media? That will ruin my career," protested Lucy. Alexander shook his head. "There must be a mistake. Mom knew how important my job is." Martin finally spoke. "Don't you see? This is exactly what Mom wanted us to understand." The other three looked at their younger brother with a mixture of confusion and resentment. Caroline, maintaining her role, intervened. "The conditions are clear. If you don't fulfill the assigned tasks, your portions of the inheritance will be donated to local charities. You have a week to decide if you accept the terms of the will." The siblings looked at each other, a storm of emotions reflected on their faces. Elaine's plan was in motion, and her children were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, in a small cabin by the sea, Elaine looked out the window. Her heart divided between the guilt for the pain she was causing and the hope that this sacrifice could finally bring back the family she so loved. The week following the reading of the will was a whirlwind of emotions and debates for the Montgomery siblings. Each of them faced a decision that could change the course of their lives. Robert, the investor, spent hours locked in his study, making calculations and projections. Was a month of poverty worth his share of the inheritance? His wife, Maria, watched him with concern. "Robert," she said one night, sitting next to him, "don't you think your mother wanted to teach you something more than the value of money?" Robert looked at her, his eyes tired and conflicted. "You don't understand, Maria. I've worked my whole life to get where I am. How can I just leave it all behind?" Maria took his hand. "Maybe that's exactly the lesson your mother wanted you to learn." Meanwhile, Lucy paced around her luxurious apartment, alternating between panic attacks and fits of fury. Her agent, George, tried to calm her down. "Lucy, darling, think of this as a spiritual retreat. You could even make a documentary about the experience when you get back." Lucy paused, considering the idea. "Do you think my followers would be interested?" George smiled, seeing an opportunity. "Of course, the influencer who left everything to honor her mother. It's pure gold." In his high-tech office, Alexander stared at the latest tablet his team had developed. The idea of spending a month without technology seemed like torture to him. His assistant Anna entered with a cup of coffee. "Sir, have you made a decision about, Alexander sighed deeply. "Anna, do you think I'm a bad person for doubting?" Anna, surprised by her boss's vulnerability, responded sincerely. "I think it's human to doubt, sir. But I also believe your mother must have had a good reason for asking this." Martin, for his part, spent his days in the local park observing families and reflecting on his life. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench, a ball rolled to his feet. A small boy came running over. "Excuse me, sir, can you pass me the ball?" Martin smiled, handing the ball to the boy. As he watched him run back to his parents, he felt a pang of nostalgia and regret. Finally, the day arrived when they had to give their answer to Caroline. The four siblings gathered again in their mother's house, the tension palpable in the air. Caroline looked at each one, her expression serious. "Well, have you made a decision?" Robert was the first to speak, his voice shaky but determined. "I'll do it for Mom." Lucy, tears in her eyes, nodded. "Me too, it will be difficult, but I owe it to her." Alexander, after a moment of doubt, said, "I accept. Mom always believed in me, even when no one else did." Everyone looked at Martin, who simply smiled and said, I think we all need this more than we think." Caroline nodded. a mixture of relief and anticipation on her face. Very well. So, we'll start. Tomorrow, Robert. I'll expect you at the Savings Supermarket at 8 a.m. Lucy. A car will pick you up to take you to the Roots Community Farm, Alexander. I'll personally take you to the New Dawn Public School. And Martin. Martin gently interrupted her. Don't worry about me, Caroline. I know exactly what I have to do. The next morning, the four siblings prepared to begin their respective tasks, each facing their own fears and insecurities. Robert stood in front of the mirror, nervously adjusting his supermarket uniform. Maria hugged him from behind. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Lucy, with a small suitcase in hand, looked nostalgically at her collection of electronic devices. With a sigh, she turned off her phone and put it in a drawer. Alexander, dressed in casual clothes he rarely wore, said goodbye to his team at the office. I'll be back soon, he promised, though a part of him wondered if that was true. Martin, for his part, headed to his ex-wife's apartment. When she opened the door, surprised to see him, he simply said, I've been away too long. Can I see the kids? As the Montgomery siblings embarked on their new experiences, in the cabin by the sea, Elaine received a call from Caroline. Aunt, they all accepted. The plan is in motion. Elaine closed her eyes, a mixture of relief and anxiety flooding her heart. Thank you, dear. I hope this helps them find their way back to themselves and to me. Caroline, sensing the emotion in her aunt's voice, gently added, They will, Aunt. They have your strength in them, even if they don't know it yet. As she hung up the phone, Elaine looked out the window towards the sea. The waves gently broke on the shore, a constant reminder that even the deepest changes begin with small movements. With a silent prayer for her children, Elaine prepared for the days ahead, hoping that at the end of this journey, her family could reunite, again, stronger and more united than ever. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was the end of a day, but the beginning of a transformation that none of the Montgomerys would ever forget. The first day of their new lives arrived with the intensity of a hurricane for the Montgomery siblings. Each of them faced a world completely different from what they were used to, and the lessons were quick to arrive. Robert arrived punctually at the Savings Supermarket at 7:45 in the morning. The manager, a burly man named Don Ramon, greeted him with a skeptical look. So you're the new guy, huh? He grunted, looking Robert up and down. I hope you're ready to work hard. There's no place for slackers. Here Robert, accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them, had to bite his tongue to avoid responding. He simply nodded and followed Don Ramon to receive his instructions. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Robert learned to operate the cash register, despite his fingers more used to typing on Bloomberg than counting change, seeming clumsy and slow. Every time he made a mistake, he felt the impatient looks of customers and the frustrated grimaces of his co-workers. During his break, exhausted and with aching feet, Robert sat in the employee room. An older woman with grey hair pulled back in a bun approached and offered him a coffee. First time in retail, right, honey? She asked with a kind smile. I'm Dolores. I've been working here for 30 years. Robert looked at her in amazement. 30 years? How do you endure it? Dolores laughed softly. Oh, it's not about enduring. It's my life. I've watched my customers' children grow up. I've shared their joys and their sorrows. This job has given me much more than you think. Those words resonated with Robert throughout the rest of the day, making him question everything he thought he knew about value and purpose. Meanwhile, Lucy arrived at the Roots Community Farm. The contrast between the luxurious car that dropped her off and the rural surroundings couldn't be more stark. A middle-aged woman with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands greeted her. Welcome to Roots, I'm Carmen, the manager. I hope you brought work clothes because here we get dirty from early on. Lucy, looking at her elegant designer boots and silk blouse, felt a wave of panic. I am not sure I have the right clothes. Carmen looked her up and down and sighed. Well, I guess we'll have to improvise. Come with me. The first hours were a physical and mental challenge for Lucy. Used to long makeup and photography sessions, she now found herself on her knees in the dirt, planting seeds and pulling weeds. The relentless sun and hard work soon left her sweaty and exhausted. During lunch, sitting with other farm workers, Lucy felt completely out of place. Without her phone to hide behind, she was forced to interact. A young woman named Rose approached her. "First time on a farm?" she asked kindly. Lucy nodded, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "It shows, doesn't it?" Rose smiled. "A little. But don't worry, we all start somewhere. You know, there's something special about watching something you planted with your own hands grow. It's like magic." That afternoon, as Lucy watched the sunset over the fields she had helped cultivate, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment that no amount of likes on social media had ever given her. Alexander, for his part, arrived at New Dawn Public School feeling completely out of his element. The principal, an energetic woman named Beatrice, greeted him with enthusiasm. "Ah, the new assistant. Just in time today. We have a special science class for the 5th graders. I hope you're ready for sticky experiments." Before Alexander could protest, he found himself in a classroom full of curious and enthusiastic children. Without his usual arsenal of technological devices, he had to resort to his wit and basic knowledge to explain scientific concepts. To his surprise, the children responded with infectious enthusiasm. Their questions, though simple, challenged him to think differently. When he managed to explain the concept of gravity using only an apple and the children's imagination, Alexander felt an excitement he hadn't experienced since his early days as a developer. During recess, while watching the children play, a teacher named Isabel approached him. "You did well in there," she commented. "These kids, many of them come from difficult homes. For some, school is the only place they can simply be children." Alexander looked at the little ones with new eyes, suddenly remembering his own childhood and the difficulties his family had faced. "I had no idea." Isabel smiled softly. "Sometimes, the most important technology we can offer is an attentive ear and an open heart." That night, as Alexander prepared to sleep without the usual buzz of devices around him, he found himself thinking of ways to use his technological knowledge to really make a difference in these children's lives. Martin, unlike his siblings, didn't have a specific task assigned. However, his decision to reconnect with his family proved to be equally challenging. Spending the day with his children after such a long absence was an emotional roller coaster. His eldest son, Paul, 10 years old, maintained a distant and somewhat hostile attitude for much of the day. His younger daughter, Sophie, 7 years old, alternated between moments of joy at having her father close and moments of confusion and sadness. During dinner, awkwardly prepared by Martin in an attempt to reconnect, Paul finally exploded. "Why are you here now? Why do you suddenly care about us?" The silence that followed was deafening. Martin, feeling the weight of his years of absence, responded with a broken voice. "Because I made a mistake, Paul. A huge mistake. I thought that leaving, finding myself, was best for everyone, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Sophie, with the innocence of her age, asked, "Does that mean you'll stay, Daddy?" Martin looked at his children, then at his ex-wife, who was watching the scene with a mixture of caution and hope. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to try. Really try this time." That night, as the 4 Montgomery siblings prepared to sleep, each reflected on the lessons of the day. Robert, with his hands sore from counting change; Lucy, with dirt under her nails but a new appreciation for hard work; Alexander, with his mind full of ideas to help underprivileged children; and Martin, with his heart heavy for the time lost but hopeful for the chance at redemption. In her cabin, by the sea, Elaine looked at the stars, her heart invisibly connected with those of her children. "I hope you're learning, my babies," she whispered to the wind. "I hope you're finding your way back." And so, with the starry sky as witness, the Montgomery family took their first steps toward reconciliation and rediscovery, not knowing that the most difficult lessons and profound revelations were yet to come. As the days passed, the Montgomery siblings immersed themselves more and more in their new realities, facing challenges that shook the foundations of their identities and beliefs. Robert, the once powerful investor, found himself struggling not only with the physical demands of his job at the supermarket, but also with a growing identity crisis. One afternoon, while organizing cans on the shelves, he overheard 2 customers talking "Did you see the news? Those Wall Street executives robbing common people again?" One commented, "Yeah, they're all the same. They only think about lining their own pockets," the other responded. Robert felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Was this how people saw him? As a thief in an expensive suit? The idea haunted him for the rest of his shift. That night, sitting in his small rented apartment, part of the conditions of the will, Robert looked at his reflection in the mirror. "Who am I really?" he asked out loud. For the first time in years, he didn't have a clear answer. Meanwhile, at the community farm, Lucy faced her own demons. The physical work was no longer as exhausting, but the lack of constant validation she got from her social media followers was affecting her self-esteem more than she wanted to admit. One day, while working in the garden with Rose, Lucy confessed, "Sometimes I feel that if I don't share something, if no one sees it, it's like it doesn't exist, you know?" Rose looked at her with understanding. "Lucy, have you ever thought that maybe you share so much because you fear that if you don't, it will be you who ceases to exist?" Those words hit Lucy like a revelation. That night, sitting under the stars, away from the glow of screens, she began to write in a diary, pouring out her deepest thoughts and emotions, just for herself. Alexander, for his part, was discovering a passion he didn't know he had. His connection with the children at the school grew every day, and he found himself constantly thinking of ways to improve their lives through education. However, one afternoon, while helping a student with learning difficulties, Alexander had a painful epiphany. He remembered all the times he had prioritized the development of luxury gadgets over projects that could have had a real impact on the lives of people in need. "I've been using my talent for the wrong things," he murmured to himself, feeling a mixture of shame and determination. That night, instead of sleeping, Alexander filled pages and pages of a notebook with ideas for educational apps and assistive technologies that could make a real difference. Martin, meanwhile, navigated the turbulent waters of family reconciliation. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. One afternoon, while playing in the park with Sophie, his daughter asked him a question that left him frozen. "Daddy, why doesn't Grandma Elaine ever come to see us?" Martin felt as if the world stopped. In his quest for reconnection with his children, he had avoided thinking about his own mother and how her absence had affected the whole family. Grandma is teaching us a very important lesson, sweetheart," he finally responded, his voice broken by emotion. That night, after putting the children to bed, Martin sat with his ex-wife Clara. "I've been an idiot," he confessed, tears in his eyes. "Not just with the kids and you, but with Mom, with everyone." Clara, surprised by this display of vulnerability, took his hand. "It's never too late to change, Martin, never." As the siblings dealt with their personal revelations, Elaine, in her retreat by the sea, felt the weight of her decision more than ever. Each day that passed away from her children was torture, but she clung to the hope that this sacrifice would be worth it. One afternoon, while walking on the beach, Elaine met an old fisherman. "You seem to carry a great weight in your heart, ma'am," the man commented. Elaine, surprised by the observation, nodded. "I'm trying to save my family." The fisherman smiled wisely. "Ah, but sometimes to save something, you first have to be willing to lose it. Are you prepared for that possibility?" The question haunted Elaine for days, making her question whether she had made the right decision. As the halfway point of the trial month approached, the four Montgomery siblings found themselves at an emotional crossroads. Each had discovered truths about themselves that they couldn't ignore, but the path forward was far from clear. Robert, walking home after a long shift, stopped in front of a bank. For a moment, he felt the urge to go in, to return to his world of numbers and power. But something stopped him. Was that really the world he wanted to return to? Lucy, looking at her reflection in a pond on the farm, realized that she no longer recognized the woman she had been just a few weeks ago. Who was she without the filters and the likes? Alexander, surrounded by drawings and thank you letters from his students, wondered how he could go back to his old life, knowing the impact he could have on these young lives. And Martin, watching his children sleep, faced the painful truth of how much he had missed and how much more he could lose. if he didn't truly change? At that moment, without knowing it, the four Montgomery siblings made a silent but profound decision. They were no longer simply complying with the conditions of a will. They were embarking on a journey of rediscovery and redemption. Meanwhile, in her cabin by the sea, Elaine looked at an old family photo, her fingers tracing the smiling faces of her children. "Have I done the right thing?" she asked out loud, her voice barely a whisper in the night. "Or have I made the biggest mistake of my life?" The answer to that question was yet to come, and with it, challenges and revelations that would test family bonds like never before. As Elaine's experiment entered its third week, each of the Montgomery siblings approached a crucial turning point in their journey of self-discovery. Robert, the once powerful investor, found himself in the midst of an existential crisis. One morning, while organizing the fresh produce section, he overheard an elderly woman arguing with Don Ramon, the manager. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Martinez, but I can't give you any more credit." "The store rules are clear," Don Ramon explained with regret. Robert watched as the elderly woman, with tears in her eyes, began to return basic food items to the shelves. Without thinking twice, he approached. "Don Ramon, can I talk to you for a moment?" After a brief private conversation, Robert returned to Mrs. Martinez. "Ma'am, please take what you need, it's covered." The elderly woman looked at him with amazement and gratitude. "God bless you, son. You don't know what this means to me." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. His mind was spinning, comparing the satisfaction he felt from helping Mrs. Martinez with the victories he had celebrated on Wall Street. How many lives had he negatively affected in his pursuit of profit? Was it too late to change? Meanwhile, Lucy faced her own decisive moment on the farm. During a heavy storm, the roof of the barn where they stored the harvests began to leak, threatening to ruin months of hard work. Without thinking, Lucy found herself leading the effort to save the harvest. Soaked and covered in mud, she worked tirelessly alongside her colleagues, moving sacks and repairing the roof. Hours later, exhausted but satisfied, Lucy looked at her reflection in a puddle. Her hair was a mess, she wore no makeup, and her clothes were unrecognizable. But the smile on her face was more genuine than any she had shown in her most popular selfies. "You know, I think this is the best photo I'll never take," she said to Rose, who was looking at her with pride. At New Dawn School, Alexander was about to face his most difficult test one day. While helping in the computer class, he noticed that Miguel, one of the brightest students, seemed distracted and sad. After class, Alexander approached the boy. "Miguel, is everything okay?" The boy, with tears in his eyes, confessed that his family would be evicted from their home at the end of the week. His father had lost his job and they couldn't pay the rent. Alexander felt like he had been punched in the stomach. In his previous life, he would have easily ignored a story like this. Now he couldn't get it out of his head. That night, breaking the rules of the experiment, Alexander made a call. "Carlos, it's me, Alexander. I need a favor." The next morning, Miguel's father received a call offering him a job at one of Alexander's companies. It wasn't charity. Alexander had recognized the man's potential based on the stories Miguel told about him as he watched the joy on Miguel's face the next day. Alexander knew he would never be the same again. Martin, for his part, faced his own challenge. One afternoon, while playing with his children in the park, Paul, his eldest son, hurt his knee falling off his bicycle. Instinctively, Martin ran to him, hugged him and comforted him. That's when he realized this was the most present he had been in his children's lives in years. That night, after putting the children to bed, Martin had an honest conversation with Clara, his ex-wife. "I've been an idiot, Clara. I've wasted years searching for something that was always here, right in front of me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm committed to being the father. Our children deserve—" Clara, with tears in her eyes, took his hand. "Martin, forgiveness is a process, but I'm willing to try if you are." As the Montgomery siblings went through these crucial moments, Elaine, in her retreat by the sea, felt a growing restlessness. Had she gone too far with her plan? Was she really helping her children or just causing more pain? One night, unable to sleep, Elaine went for a walk on the beach. The full moon illuminated the waves, and the sound of the sea seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Suddenly, Elaine saw a familiar figure walking towards her. It was Caroline. "Caroline, what are you doing here?" Elaine asked. Surprised, Caroline, with a serious expression, responded, "Aunt, we need to talk. Something has happened." Elaine's heart raced. "What's wrong? Are my children okay?" Caroline took her aunt's hands. "They're fine, Aunt, but I think it's time you knew the whole truth, and they do too." Elaine felt the world stop. "What do you mean?" "Aunt," Caroline began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I haven't told you about the will and the experiment, something that will change everything." As the waves broke on the shore, Elaine listened to Caroline's revelation, a truth that would shake the foundations of everything she believed she knew about her family and about herself. At that moment, under the starry sky and next to the infinite sea, Elaine Montgomery realized that the journey she had initiated to save her family was about to take a turn that none of them could have anticipated. Caroline's revelation fell upon Elaine like a tsunami, shaking the foundations of everything she believed she knew about her family and about herself. "Aunt Elaine," Caroline began, her voice trembling, "the will, it's not real. There was never an inheritance to distribute." Elaine felt the world stop. What? But how? Caroline took a deep breath. Before continuing, "When you told me your plan, I realized that you needed something stronger to motivate your children. So I invented the inheritance. The documents, the conditions, everything was created by me." Elaine staggered, leaning on a nearby rock to avoid falling. "But why?" "Because I love you, Aunt, and I love my cousins. I knew they needed a powerful catalyst for change. Money, well, it's something they all understood." As Elaine processed this information, Caroline continued, "But there's more, Aunt. Your children, they've discovered the truth about your death." Elaine's heart stopped for a moment. "How?" "It was an accident. Robert saw a customer at the supermarket who knew you. The woman mentioned having seen you recently on the beach. Robert connected the dots and contacted his siblings. They're on their way here, right?" Now Elaine felt the world spinning around her. Her entire plan, all her good intentions, seemed to crumble like a sandcastle before the tide. Meanwhile, on the road leading to the beach, the four Montgomery siblings traveled together in tense silence. Each of them dealt with a storm of emotions: shock, anger, confusion, and surprisingly, a glimmer of hope. Robert, at the wheel, was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe she deceived us like this, after everything we've been through." Lucy, sitting beside him, responded softly, "But did she really deceive us? Or did she give us exactly what we needed?" Alexander, from the back seat, added, "She's right. A month ago, we wouldn't even be in the same car together." Martin, the quietest until now, finally spoke. "Mom always knew how to unite us. Even when we were children, I guess some things never change." As they approached the cabin by the sea, each of the siblings reflected on their personal journey over the past few weeks. Robert thought about Mrs. Martinez and how a simple act of kindness had opened his eyes to a world he had ignored for years. Lucy remembered the storm on the farm and how, for the first time in a long time, she had felt part of something bigger than herself. Alexander thought about Miguel and his family, and how using his influence for a greater good had given him a purpose that no gadget could match. Martin, looking out the window, thought about his children and the second chance he had been given to be the father he should have always been. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Elaine and Caroline were waiting for them on the beach, the tension palpable in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Robert who took the first step. Walking straight to his mother, he wrapped her in a strong and emotional embrace. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, tears running down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry." One by one, the other siblings joined the hug, forming a circle around Elaine. Tears, laughter, and words of love mixed with the sound of the waves. When they finally separated, Elaine looked at her children with eyes full of love and regret. "My babies, I'm sorry too. I never meant to deceive you. I wanted you to remember who you really were." Lucy, wiping away her tears, responded, "We did, Mom. I think we all did." Alexander nodded. "You gave us the most valuable gift of all, the chance to rediscover ourselves." Martin, taking his mother's hand, added, "And to reconnect with each other and with you." Caroline, watching the scene with a mixture of relief and anxiety, finally spoke. "There's something else you need to know. The inheritance, it's not real. It was part of the plan to motivate you." A heavy silence fell over the group. The siblings looked at each other, processing this new information. Finally, to everyone's surprise, Robert began to laugh, a genuine and liberating laughter that soon infected the others. "You know what?" he said between laughs. "I think we received an inheritance much more valuable than any amount of money." Lucy nodded, smiling. "The gift of truly seeing ourselves, of seeing what really matters," Alexander added, "and the opportunity to make a real difference in the world." Martin, hugging his mother, concluded, "And the gift of being a family again, a true family." As the sun ascended into the sky, bathing the reunited family in a golden light, the Montgomery family realized that this was not the end of their journey, but just the beginning. They had much to heal, much to rebuild, but for the first time in years, they had something invaluable: hope. Elaine, surrounded by the love of her children, looked towards the horizon. The future was uncertain, but she no longer feared facing it, because now she knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. Caroline, watching the scene with tears in her eyes, knew that her risky decision had been worth it. The Montgomery family had been transformed, not by the promise of material wealth, but by the rediscovery of the love, compassion, and connection they had always had within them. As the family began to walk together towards the cabin, ready to start their new chapter, the sea continued its eternal ebb and flow, a silent witness to a transformation that none of them would ever forget. 6 months had passed since that emotional reunion on the beach. The Montgomery family had embarked on a journey of healing and reconnection that none of them would have imagined possible before Elaine's experiment. It was a sunny Sunday morning, and Elaine's house buzzed with activity. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bread filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and animated conversations. The family had gathered to celebrate Elaine's 81st birthday, but this time there were no absences or broken hearts. In the kitchen, Robert and Lucy prepared breakfast together, a scene unthinkable just a few months ago. Robert, with an apron over his casual shirt, flipped pancakes while Lucy cut fresh fruit. "You know," said Robert, looking at his sister with a smile, "I never thought I'd say this, but I miss the supermarket a little." Lucy laughed, shaking her head. "And I never imagined I'd prefer the smell of dirt and plants over that of expensive makeup. Life takes many turns, doesn't it?" In the living room, Alexander played with Martin's children, showing them how an educational app he had developed worked, inspired by his experience at New Dawn School. "So this app will help kids like Miguel learn better?" asked Paul, Martin's eldest son, with genuine interest. Alexander nodded, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Exactly, and not just to learn, but to believe in themselves and their potential." Martin, watching the scene from the sofa next to Clara, his ex-wife and now reconciled partner, couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that my brother, the tech genius, would end up being the favorite uncle? Clara gently squeezed his hand. "Second chances are wonderful, aren't they?" In the backyard, Elaine and Caroline prepared the table for the family breakfast. Elaine paused for a moment, observing the blue sky and taking a deep breath. "Are you okay, Aunt?" asked Caroline, noticing her pause. Elaine turned to her niece, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "More than okay, dear. I'm grateful for you, for my children, for this second chance that life has given us." Caroline hugged her aunt. "You gave us that chance, Aunt. Your love and your courage made all this possible." As they finished setting the table, Elaine reflected on the changes that had occurred in her children's lives. Robert had left his job on Wall Street and now ran a foundation that helped small businesses and low-income families. His experience at the supermarket had completely changed his perspective on the value of money and honest work. Lucy had transformed her social media presence. Instead of selfies and product promotions, she now used her influence to raise awareness about sustainable agriculture and rural communities. She still visited the Roots farm regularly, finding a peace and purpose that no amount of likes could match. Alexander had completely reoriented his technology company. Now he focused on developing accessible solutions for public schools and students with special needs. His experience at New Dawn had ignited a passion for using technology to make a real difference in people's lives. Martin, for his part, had found a balance between his spiritual quest and his family responsibilities. He now led mindfulness workshops for parents, helping them to be more present in their children's lives, a lesson he himself had learned the hard way. The sound of the front door opening pulled Elaine out of her thoughts. It was Don Ramon, Robert's former boss at the supermarket, accompanied by Dolores, the veteran cashier who had been Robert's mentor. "Welcome," exclaimed Elaine, embracing them warmly. The Montgomery family had grown, incorporating those who had been a crucial part of their transformation. Slowly more guests arrived, rose from the farm, Principal Beatrice and some students from New Dawn, even Mrs. Martinez, the customer Robert had helped at the supermarket. Elaine's house, filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of new and renewed friendships. Finally, with everyone gathered around the table in the backyard, Robert stood up, glass in hand. "Family, friends," he began, his voice charged with emotion. "A year ago we were lost, separated not only physically but emotionally. We believed that success was measured in numbers in a bank account or followers on social media." He paused, looking at each of his siblings. "But Mom, in her infinite wisdom, gave us the most precious gift, the opportunity to rediscover ourselves and to reconnect." Lucy continued, "She showed us that true wealth is in the connections we make, in the lives we touch." Alexander added, "She taught us that our talents and abilities have a higher purpose than personal gain." Martin concluded, "And she reminded us that family, love, and compassion are the true pillars of a fulfilling life." Elaine, with tears in her eyes, looked at her children with pride and infinite love. "My babies," she said softly, "you are my greatest treasure. Seeing you reunited, happy, and at peace is the best gift a mother could ask for." Caroline raised her glass. "To the Montgomery family, to second chances and new beginnings. To family," everyone chorused, toasting under the warm morning sun. As the celebration continued, Elaine allowed herself a moment of reflection. The road had been hard, full of unexpected turns and painful truths, but looking around, seeing her family reunited, happy and transformed, she knew that every tear, every moment of doubt, had been worth it. The experiment that had begun as a desperate attempt to reconnect with her children had become a life lesson for all of them. They had learned that the true value of life is not measured in possessions or achievements, but in the connections we make, in the love we give, and in the difference we make in the lives of others. As the sun ascended in the sky, bathing the reunited family in a golden light, Elaine knew that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter filled with love, understanding, and the promise of a bright future together. And so, with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses in the background, the Montgomery family welcomed their new dawn. United by love and strengthened by the lessons learned, the most valuable inheritance, they discovered, was not something that could be counted in bills or properties, but in transformed hearts and lives touched by the power of love and understanding.